Guess who's back? And in Baku. Let's get started.
Another race for the world's greatest driver, Juan Manuel Fangio.
Former world champion Jim Clark leapt into the lead. That's Clark's Lotus going like a bomb.
And James Hunt is the world champion by just one single point.
By being a racing driver, you are under risk all the time. And if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver.
And that is Michael Schumacher ahead, the world champion.
To become a four-time world champion, Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, champion of the world.
That's for all the kids out there who dream the impossible.
Max Verstappen is champion of the world.
Oh my God! Max Verstappen, you are the world champion! The world champion!
Hello and welcome to episode 10 of F1 in Review 2023. I'm Tom Clabon and as ever I'm joined by Tristan Fancourt and Angus Gallager. Racing is back this weekend, so we're talking about the Azerbaijan Grand Prix and the first sprints at the Baku circuit as well. But first, where should we have gone? We can't get into this, I suppose, new episode where we're looking forward to racing without talking about the 3-week wilderness we had as racing fans. And after just 3 races as well, not a summer break, not an ordinary break, because it wasn't meant to be, it wasn't planned. There was meant to be the Chinese Grand Prix in this period. That was cancelled, however, owing to the country's now abandoned COVID-0 policy, which, for those who don't know, essentially a government plan to reduce cases and deaths to an absolute low, meaning that big sporting events, big social events, big events where people were coming together were cancelled, and the Chinese Grand Prix was one of them. So to start with then, Tristan, where should we have gone, where could we have gone during this time?
Well, to be completely unoriginal, I would have liked us to gone to China, because it was... If we look at the timeline, it was very unfortunate about how everything sort of developed, because it was the 18th, 19th-ish, depending on what news cycle you're looking at, of January, and some reporting even earlier, that's 17th-ish, when it was officially cancelled. And then we heard in March that China was fully reopened again. So we know that the track is still there, because it's not like a street circuit. It is a proper track. It's a Tilke track at that, and one of my favourite tracks. And that might be slightly controversial. Some people might not like the China track, but I do, because it has this really cool opening turn 1, which is sort of leads into 2 and 3, and it gets tighter as you go round, and it's brilliant. I really like it. So I really would have liked us to have gone to China, because it feels like it's been quite a while since we went there, and it would have also given Guan Yu Zhou his first ever home Grand Prix, and I think that would have been really cool for him as well. This is off the back of Audi, who are taking over from Alfa Romeo, doubling down on the Chinese sort of investment through their launch of their car program this week, being in China. So clearly the Formula One team is doubling down in that area. So it would have been quite nice, I think, to have a Chinese Grand Prix with a Chinese driver, with a team that clearly is investing in that area. There's always something quite nice about the home teams and home tracks and things like that. So that would have been really cool. If not, I'm still campaigning for us to go back to Mugello. Do you remember Mugello?
Yeah.
Back in 2021?
Yeah.
Now, Mugello is also famed for its one-time appearance during the silly season, the pandemic season, and in that season, Valtteri Bottas kind of threw a spanner in the works of many of the drivers at the back by slowing down a bit whilst restarting the race under a safety car, which meant we had a massive collision at the back. It was a very dramatic race, but there's no getting away from the fact that it delivered us some good racing, gave us a bit of drama, and I prefer it, I think, to some of the other options that maybe I don't really like. Imola. Oh, I said it there. I said it. Yeah, I know some of you might like Imola. I'm not a massive Imola fan, but I actually really enjoyed Mugello. So it would have been cool to go back there. Maybe Imola and Mugello could alternate. But definitely, we know it's a track they could have gone to. So that would have been my preference, either to China or perhaps Mugello, because who's another Italian Grand Prix?
I have 3 in mind that come to mind when you think of races that could have gone in that place. 2 European based and 1 which is actually based in Asia. So, my choices. I think, firstly, I agree with the Mugello shout, by the way. Brilliant shout, great racetrack. My only thing would be it's very fast, and typically those kinds of tracks tend to be less good for racing, which is a shame because it's an absolute stunner, and it's also set in the rolling Tuscan hills. So it's a stunning track. My 3, first one that came to mind was Istanbul, Turkey. Good memories there from when it came back onto the calendar the last couple of years, when we had a couple of races where basically they forgot to lay the track properly, so it was incredibly greasy, but actually produced a very good spectacle. Secondly, I'm thinking Malaysia. It's been a while, and there was the possibility of Malaysia coming back onto the calendar this year until they, in the end, forgot about it and went for the 4-week break. But absolute classic of a circuit, the first circuit of the sort of new batch in like countries where F1's maybe less supported. The real sort of global breakout in sort of the 2000s. Malaysia definitely fits that bill in terms of being a racetrack, which is like very good for racing and also in a stunning location. And the third one that comes to mind, it'll never happen, but I'll say it anyway, the Nürburgring Nordschleife, just because it is the most incredible circuit in the world. It has about, I think it's like 15 miles long or something like that. The fastest it's ever been driven was when I think it was a BMW Sauber did a trial run for like a public sort of stunt demonstration and lapped it in just over 7 minutes. So imagine a Formula 1 race with 7-minute laps. It's way too dangerous to ever host any Formula 1. But we can dream of... you did used to host Formula 1 back in the 70s. It's where Niki Lauda almost lost his life in a terrible crash in the 1970s. But that was back when they didn't really consider safety to be top of their list. But I still think it will never happen. But imagine if it was... if we're able to say that round 4 of the F1 season was held at the Nürburgring Nordschleife.
It's quite funny, really, because on that list that you just read out on my screen is pretty much the same list. But aside from being the Nürburgring, I had Hockenheim there as my preferred German circuit, really. Because I think it's absolutely scandalous that there's not a German Grand Prix bolted into the calendar always. Yeah. There's a British Grand Prix, Italian Grand Prix, French Grand Prix, Spanish Grand Prix, all the European countries that have a rich racing history, if you will, but no German. I mean, we've got a German team, we've got German drivers, one in the sport now, one is a reserve driver, many that have won multiple world championships. I mean, I understand that F1's now very much of the mindset of we can't just be in Europe, we've got to go to different continents and expand the market and get more eyes and people going to it, etc. I get that entirely, but to not have somewhere like Hockenheim there, to not have a German Grand Prix, particularly after Hockenheim produced such a great racing spectacle last time it was in the calendar, if memory serves me correctly. It was Sebastian Vettel, ironically a German driver, that crashed off spectacularly and sort of threw away his chances of competing seriously for a championship in 2019, I believe, or 18, pre-pandemic at the very least. So yeah, I think that's outrageous, really. And second of all, I think what would be quite nice, and be great to hear your opinions on this, if F1 were to go and publicise a reserve standby calendar of circuits that was made by public vote. So let's say there's a short list that the FIA put out, like these are the possible reserve circuits, then the popular vote of people like you and I can vote in that and go, well, okay, I'd like Malaysia, I'd like Istanbul, I'd like Hockenheim, for example, and whatever one wins is then put as the reserve circuit for the upcoming Grand Prix calendar, if you will. What do you think about that?
I think that's a great idea. They definitely should do that and bring back Hockenheim. Unfortunately, Tom, no more France either. Paul Ricard's gone, so we're losing those classic Grand Prix that you'd perhaps expect. You would expect France, you would expect Germany, but they are no more. So maybe it's a matter of time before, imagine Belgium seems to be under threat. Heaven forbid we lost Spa, because that is also one of my favourites. But I totally agree. We should have these reserve tracks, and I think it'd be a great idea if fans could vote for the one we went to. I was about to say, but that might make logistics quite difficult. But actually, let's face it, they ship them currently sporadically around the world. When I say them, I mean the Formula One circus is shipped around the world sporadically. So I think they could do it, and I think that'd be a great way to engage with the fans in a moment like this, where there has been an unexpected change. And because we are living in such a dynamic world now, where once in a generation event seems to happen every couple of weeks, I think it's actually worth considering how we manage times like this when we may not just be able to go to a track anymore. So yeah, I think Lewis Hamilton would agree with you about Malaysia, because he was a massive fan of it, and I would strongly stand behind Hockenheim. Hockenheim was the last Grand Prix I actually went to, so I would really like it to come back, because that was an amazing race to see.
I don't know about the fans thing, because I remember that one time when the British public was asked to name a boat which was to go on the Arctic seas, and they called it Boaty McBoatface. I'm not sure. I reckon we'd have imagine if we had a similar thing where the F1 public asked us to go and race at some ridiculous circuit which wouldn't be safe enough. I'm being a proper.
I think it would be a pre-approved list.
Yeah, that's where the shortlist comes in.
You think they wouldn't just give a free for all out to the public?
They won't be like, oh, welcome to the Formula One Snetterton Grand Prix. Let's see how they make it around this teeny tiny track.
Yeah, well, maybe there would be some hope for it then, possibly.
Love Snetterton.
And with racing finally back, we should probably talk about what's coming up. The Azerbaijan Grand Prix, as I've mentioned there. So last year when we were here, it qualified as Leclerc in first, Perez second, Verstappen third. But you remember that double Ferrari DNF, so it finished with Verstappen in first, Perez in second, a 1-2 for Red Bull, and one George Russell getting himself a third place. So to start with then, who do we think is going to be on the top step of the podium, and by extension, the other steps of the podium for that matter as well?
Go on, Tom. Who are you placing your money behind?
I have a funny feeling Alonso is going to win it.
Really?
Ooh.
Really?
How the tables have turned.
I wasn't sure. I wasn't expecting that.
I think he will. I've just got a feeling that it's going to be a difficult race for Red Bull. I think they're going to have one or two problems when it comes to reliability and maybe a slow pit stop, which will put them on their back heels, if you will. Ferrari are seemingly nowhere. Mercedes are very hit and miss, and let's be fair, Aston Martin, and you've got to go and say Fernando Alonso versus Lance Stroll, who has been doing well, to be fair to him. Alonso is the one who's going to go and take that win. I think he's shown great consistency, but there's a question as well. Is he going to be hitting the ground running? Is he going to be able to carry on with what he was doing to start with, or is this break going to hamper him, and by extension others, really? Because I think it could play a factor in terms of momentum going, or momentum being built, and then I suppose that sort of dead period, if you will, it will have an effect, and vice versa. Flipping on its head is a chance for the teams that have done not so well to start with, Ferrari being an example, for them to have a reset and to go again. But what do we think about that? Do we think Alonso could win this one, or is that another pipe dream?
Do you remember 2021 when Sergio Perez started in 7th and ended up winning the race?
Vaguely.
I know. That cast your mind back many years, but I don't think this is that obscure. But granted, there were quite a number of things that happened in that race, including Max Verstappen's unfortunate tyre explosion thing that happened, Lewis Hamilton locking up his front tyres because he left the magic on, which is still one of my favourite sentences. Just, oh, Bono, I left the magic on. But my point is, as Azerbaijan can throw huge amounts of unexpected things your way, just because it's a really fast, tight street track. So when you say, oh, I think Alonso could win it, I can get behind that. I can really get behind that. It has thrown many weird things our way before. Before Haas were doing really well last year, don't forget Kevin Magnussen in, I want to say 2019, was like in third place at one point for Haas, and then eventually he fell back. And Lance Stroll has got a podium in Azerbaijan as well, which was an unexpected surprise. So yeah, when you say it like that, I think I can get behind that. Unfortunately, I'm slightly less confident in the ability of Red Bull to give up the top step of the podium. So I think it's going to be a Red Bull. I think it's either going to be Max or Perez. And then I think Ferrari. I think Ferrari is going to do quite well here as well. I reckon they're going to get the third place, and then I think Aston Martin is going to have a bit of a disaster. It might actually be Lance Stroll who causes the disaster, because he tends to outbrake himself at the moment, and turn 1 in Azerbaijan is fiercely dangerous. And I saw a picture today of the regular road in Baku, and it looks like turn 1 of on the first lap of the race. So clearly, if civilians can't get around it very well, then it's a poorly designed corner, and it does usually cause us some chaos. So I think it's going to be Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, and then I think Charles Leclerc is going to be on third.
I'm going to go the complete opposite. I think that there's been a 4-week break. We've got a new, slightly revamped format with the sprint, which, yes, I know is separate from the Grand Prix, but still, it's going to be putting some of the teams off kilter in terms of their usual weekend routine. And I'm feeling also the fact that, last year, Azerbaijan wasn't massively eventful, other than the Ferraris self-destructing. Otherwise, it was a pretty standard order. We haven't had an eventful Azerbaijan Grand Prix since 2021, and usually this race has feast or famine. It either is absolute carnage or it's incredibly dull, to put it bluntly. So I think, considering last year was a bit more of a famine, we're going to have an absolute chaotic fest this year. Max Verstappen's still going to win because he's going to serenely progress through all the chaos. I would say that I reckon Alonso will finish on the podium. I think he's just on a good run at the moment. I think that's a fair shout. And I'm going to stick my neck out and throw in a rogue podium finisher. Who's it going to be as I look down the list of the Drivers' Championship standings? I'm going to say...
I was going to say, nothing like wing it on the fly.
You know what prediction came up in my head before this bit, strangely, was I have a feeling Logan Sargent's going to get points. I just think it's going to be... it could just be a chaotic race where 7-8 drivers retire, a bit like in Australia where we had lots of cars crash out by the end. And, someone will get up close to the points where they wouldn't usually be. My third podium finisher, I'm going to say... carry on from our positive discussion about him last week, Nico Hülkenberg will get his first Formula 1 podium in Baku this weekend.
Blimey. And Haas goes wild.
Yes. Gene Haas's words of Haas wins the World Championship get ever closer.
Champion. Yeah. I've been speaking of Haas, I received in the post a copy of Gunther Steiner's book. I'd like to thank I had to buy it like an average person. I had to actually buy the book for Gunther Steiner. But it is a really interesting read because Gunther talks about some of the highs of last year, and apparently, and I can only take Gunther's word for this, but Gene Haas smiled when Kevin Magnussen got that pole position. So he might actually laugh if Haas get a podium. So we may actually see happy Gene Haas if that ever happens. one day.
Maybe even a fist bump or something, or a hug or a high five. I'm dreaming now, I realise.
That's some serious emotion display there, Tom. Are you sure he's capable of that?
Well, looks like we'll be finding out come the end of Sunday by the judging of Angus's guesses there.
It is an interesting read, though. I've had to wash my eyes out with soap, though, after reading the book. It's not for those with a nervous disposition against swearing, I must admit. Gunter writes as he speaks, which is very entertaining, but also a bit jarring as well. Like, there are a lot of effing and blinding in the book. But yeah, so if you're a fan of Haas like me, then I would recommend picking it up, because I found out some really interesting things. Would you like to know some of my my little Steiner facts that I actually wrote down? Because
sure, let's hear it.
I thought you might be interested, right? So in 2020, Haas had a budget of $173 million, whereas Mercedes had nearly $500 million. And that's part of the reason why they brought in these regulations to do the cost cap. But that is an outstanding difference. I mean, that's way less than half. And is my one more little Haas fact. I'll sprinkle them in throughout this series of podcasts that we do this year. Gunter was discussing sponsorship and things like that, and he said that 65% of their budget is covered by sponsorship, which I guess is theirs, but given the way McLaren are going at the moment, I reckon McLaren must be in the 80 to 90%, because they've got sponsors left, right and centre. So if Haas are saying 65% for them, I reckon McLaren are way higher than that. But there you go, a couple of interesting budgeting facts for you there, and we all like interesting budgeting facts.
It now makes sense, really, why they were so concerned about the dropping of their sponsor, Arcali, I guess, or the decision to drop it, really, because once you take away over half of your budget, come this season or next season or seasons to come, it being paid at some point, that makes a huge hit, really. You can see why ultimately you had someone like Mick Schumacher having to leave owing to how expensive he was for the team, really. It was almost like a domino effect, and one thing leads to another, ripples, if you will.
Yeah, and Mick was costing, some of the crashes, like the one in Saudi Arabia, gave them a bill of basically $1 million. I mean, that means that's 170th of their budget gone on one crash. And you might think, well, that's 170. That's ridiculous. But actually, that's one crash, and that's an absolutely insane amount of money just to go on one mistake. And Gunter was discussing this fact actually in the book, and basically saying that on one hand, not only could they not afford to just keep repairing the car. I mean, if he did that every race, that'd be £24 million. But also, like they couldn't also risk Mick killing himself, and that's a fair point. And I think one of those points that we kind of gloss over when we're discussing crashes. When it is driver error like that, there has to be a question also about whether or not the driver is putting themselves at risk. And apparently, according to Gunter, that's part of the reason why they ended up not taking him forward, amongst other reasons.
My main question about the book is, are you like me? Do you read a book in people's voices or a text in people's voices? Because if you're reading that book with Gunter's voice, his beautiful hybrid accent in your ears, then that must be quite the experience.
Yeah, I think so. I think
I tend to do that. I feel
I wouldn't be able to replicate it out loud, but definitely I felt like Gunter was reading it. So I guess Gunter's living rent free in my brain for a bit, which is nice. Is it nice? I'm not sure if it isn't nice. If I break out in a fit of rage and swearing, then the book's infiltrated into my deep psyche.
And on the flip side then of the first question of who's going to do well, who's going to be on the podium, who needs to hit the ground running after this big hiatus, if you will? Let's go with Angus first.
Not through any fault of his own, but Charles Leclerc, honestly. I mean, the fact that he's had poor luck, obviously, in his first couple of races, and we spoke in depth about Ferrari last week on the podcast about their travails and their structural reset that they're promising. But I feel like he really does need to have a strong start. He needs to, because he's always been. I was thinking about this earlier. He's always been, even in a rubbish Ferrari car, or even a below average. Was it Sauber when he first came into the sport? Did that year at Sauber? You felt dragged every ounce out of the car, a bit like how Verstappen would drag every ounce out of the below part Red Bulls or that Toro Rosso he used to be in. And Leclerc, I think, has been very good at that, but he needs to show that, because clearly this could be a year where Ferrari are in that position and they are not strong. So I think he needs to continue to be the driver who can, even in adversity, get the absolute most every last bit out of the car, even if it's a bit of a tractor, shall we say, to drive. A bit like how in that 2020 season, the Ferrari was sixth, seventh fastest car. It was awful, and Sebastian Vettel, who had admittedly been released by Ferrari, was clearly uninterested. Was dropped off a bit. He performed poorly, but Leclerc was absolutely on it. Leclerc was taking that Ferrari to places it shouldn't have been, like finishing the top 4 or 5 quite regularly. I think he needs to hit the ground running and sort of put himself back on the map in a good way. Maybe I'm being harsh. Do you think I'm being harsh on him, or do you think he's got enough credit in the bank for that, or would you say that he needs to, maybe for his own sake, hit the ground running?
I think he definitely has credit in the bank. There's no question about his talent, really. But I think when you're comparing him to someone like Verstappen, I think originally when he first came onto the scene, they were seen very much as equal, dare I say, as being the two who will fight for the World Championships coming up. And that may still well be the case. But when you look at how last season went and now this season, you're starting to see the difference in quality between Verstappen and Leclerc, I feel, anyway. Not saying Leclerc's a bad driver, but Verstappen is just of a different quality, and granted, in a different sort of period of his career, if you will. So I think he needs to go and remind everybody just how good he is, would be my way of putting it, really, because you're right, you can go and blame the reliability of your car to a point, you can go and blame Ferrari to another extent as well, but if you really are a world champion, or someone who's going to be a world champion, you need to go and, I suppose, dodge the hurdles that are coming towards you, and get over the issues that are facing you, really, and go and not use them as excuses or make people forget about the circumstances you're having to deal with, really, because I think if he's not careful, he could get jumped by someone like, well, George Russell springs to mind, for example, looking how well he's done with that Mercedes car in similar-ish circumstances to this Ferrari, dare I say, not the best machinery, but still doing exceptionally well. And then there's Lando Norris as well, which I feel that it won't be too long before he joins a bigger team. So yeah, I think he needs to remind everyone, really. But that may be harsh from me. What do you think, Tristan?
No, I don't think so. It's really difficult to watch Charles Leclerc's progression, because he has had such an upwards trajectory, and we were expecting so many great things for him, because he sort of sprung into the sport off the back of, obviously great season in Formula 2, then came into the sport with Alfa Romeo, and has been picked by Ferrari as this up-and-coming, glorious talent. And then last year, the beginning of the trajectory upwards with the new regulations meant that everyone thought, well, yes, okay, 2020 wasn't that great, perhaps, for Charles, but that's just the poor car. And then, now he's got a great car, he's going to win the World Championship. And I think he even thought he was going to win the World Championship. And then that died away because Ferrari's poor reliability. And then this year, unfortunately, Charles been lumbered with a car that is just not performing as well as he would like. And no one wants Ferrari to be lingering back a bit. And it seems like, as we've discussed in previous podcasts, they've been hampered a bit by the subtle changes to the rules. And so I think Charles' season so far has been pretty forgettable. And I can't really think of any moment I've thought, God, great to see Charles in that scrap, Yeah. Because even if a driver's not doing perhaps that well, because the car's not doing very well, you still get those magic moments. Like, for example, last year we had Lewis Hamilton at Silverstone. Do you remember that classic line from last year, and Lewis Hamilton goes through, and you think, wow, glad Hamilton was there to have that battle as well. Never been any moments like that from Charles, and I know it's very early into the season, although it doesn't feel like it because we've had a blooming long break. Grrr, that's Gunter coming out. Sorry. And so I feel like you could have removed him from many of the races, and I thought, well, he hasn't really had anything. So I totally agree. He really needs to show everyone, what his mettle is and why he's there fighting in Ferrari. Because, to be honest, he shouldn't be so far behind Carlos Sainz. We in previous debates we've always pegged Leclerc above Sainz, but the numbers don't lie, and Sainz has 20 points, and Leclerc is dwindling on 6, and there's been bad luck in there, etc., etc. But hey, that's the way of things sometimes, and we need the drivers to demonstrate the talent. So I want him to prove everyone wrong. And sort of following on from that, I think the rookies have something to show, or need to show something this year. Nick De Vries, Logan Sargent. I know you're having images of in winning points, but to be honest, I haven't really seen anything yet. Nick De Vries, especially in Alpha Tauri, taking over from Pierre Gasly. Pierre Gasly owned that seat, let's face it. And so I'd kind of like to see the up and coming Red Bull talent shine through a little bit as well. And it's always nice when the rookies sort of demonstrate why they've been chosen, and they have been chosen over everyone else. But just to add balance to that for the more experienced drivers, I feel like I would like to see something a bit more from Yuki Tsunoda. Again, another driver that has been hyped up, especially before he joined the sport a couple of years back. He's now out of his second sophomore sort of year in Formula One. He needs to start proving himself, and so far he has just gained a reputation of getting very angry on the radio rather than demonstrating his brilliant driving prowess.
I'm quite conflicted about Yuki Tsunoda, honestly, because I thought if you'd have asked me how he'd be doing at this point in, let's say, a few months ago, I'd have said, he'd probably be fighting with Nick De Vries. De Vries would probably have the better of him, really, and he'd be dwindling down where he is. And he is dwindling down in P16, there's no doubt about that, but I think he's actually surpassed my expectations. I mean, a point, for example, the consistency as well of keeping it in and around the points with that Alpha Tauri car, I think is commendable to a point, because I think this car is going to be one that's going to be down in the sort of wooden spoon territory of the Constructors' Championship, as was last season. But then that's fine. He's jumped over a very low bar of mine, but he was brought into Formula 1 after having one season in Formula 2, not winning the damn thing, which, as you know, irks me a lot. And then he's heralded as being the next big thing of Red Bull and the next talent, if you will. And we're yet to see that. So I don't know what to think about him, really. I think he could go in the sort of Daniel Kvyat territory of Formula 1, where a lot of things are expected. He nearly gets there-ish, shows glimmers, but it ultimately fades away. So I think, I'll be looking at him for different reasons. But Nick De Vries in particular, I mean, he was brought into the sport after that great debut at Williams, always heralded as a fantastic driver by Toto Wolff and Mercedes, but for me there was always the question mark of why has it been this long before he's got himself into Formula 1 in terms of the age, if you will. Money's a part of that, sure, but talent ultimately overrides that, as we see in some aspects like Esteban Ocon, for example, Raikkonen going back as well, people who didn't really come from money. So I think the sheen which was on Nick De Vries with respect to him is starting to be worn off, but it's up to him to put that sheen back on and show why he should be the person to replace, let's say, Perez or even Max Verstappen if something awful happens and they can't race.
And I guess to finish as well, we had breaking news today. The F1 Commission in the lead up to Baku have had a meeting, and I guess we spoke about the new sprint format, didn't we, in the last couple of weeks? Mm-hmm. Well, it's been confirmed now. It's just to confirm the new format. Practice 1 would be on the Friday morning/afternoon as usual. Qualifying for the main race will be on the Friday evening. Saturday is like sprint day, so a shorter qualifying session with the same format, but with shortened sessions. So Q1 would be 12 minutes, Q2 10, and Q3 8. That would set the grid for the sprint race on Saturday afternoon. And then those would have the same number of points as it did last year, so 8 down to 1 from 1st to 8th place. But that wouldn't affect the running order for Sunday. That would still be set from qualifying from the Friday evening to try and get teams to go more hell for leather, because it was thought the sprint races before were a bit soporific because they feared that teams were not willing to take as many chances. And also in other news, the fact that there's been an increase in the number of engine components that teams can use from 3 to 4. So Charles Leclerc currently breathing a big sigh of relief in his Monaco flat. Your thoughts, guys?
Thank goodness they've introduced more engine components, because I think if they want to increase the amount of racing you've got to do, you've got to accept that there's going to be more wear and tear on the engines. And I know they've been pushing for this for a while from the team's perspective, so really pleased with that. And yeah, this seems like a really sound option. I think we sometimes forget that sprints are a bit more experimental and we can keep adjusting them. It may well be that after giving it a go like this, we go, nah, that doesn't really work either, and we move on. So I'm just pleased that for a sport that talks about how it's trying to evolve, they are continuing to press on and have some fun with this. And I think by cutting out the extra free practice session and the free practice session that we didn't no one really wanted, I think it will entice viewers to watch more of the F1 content, which can only be good for the sport. It can only be good for us. Let's face it, they are supposed to be doing this stuff for the viewers. They would stop doing it if it wasn't for viewers and sponsorship. So yeah, I'm kind of behind this at the moment. But that maybe is because I'm a bit more of a maverick when it comes to updating the rules and changing the sport for the better.
No complaints from me either, really. I think the idea to have a shorter qualifying session for the sprint race is very sound, very logical. It is for a sprint after all, and there is going to be the proper qualifying, if you will, on the Friday that will set the grid for Sunday, which everyone is going to watch more than they are the sprint, let's be honest. So I think that's very sound as well. I think the engine component, the addition of that is also very good, putting that up to 4, but I do feel that there should have been some leniency, if you will, at the very least, from the sort of cost cap thing, because while more engines are great, if there's crashes, that's still going to mean, let's say, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds replacing end plates, nose cones, various bits of the car ready for Sunday, which has to be done in such a tight and, I suppose, pressurised situation as well. So I would like to see some leniency on there, or at least a sort of, I suppose, a different type of cost cap for the sprint races, if you will, let's say for the repairs that happen on the Saturday evening. But good steps in the right direction, I have to say. I mean, you can't have all your cake and eat it. You can't have Rome built in one day, and it seems to be a very logical set of progressions, really, from the FA, and long may it continue, really, because if we like it or not, sprints are here to stay, so we might as well hope and pray that they go in the right direction and become more user-friendly for both drivers, teams and fans as well. And it seems that's all we've got time for in terms of episode 10 of F1 in Review. Thank you very much for listening, wherever you listen to this podcast, be that your preferred podcast provider or elsewhere. A reminder, you can follow us on Twitter and TikTok, the handle being F1 in Review. We post the episodes there on Twitter at least, and then some short snippets of previous episodes as well, so do go and listen back to our discussions there about various different topics. We'll be continuing to post them as well. Now, if we haven't mentioned it already, there's the Azerbaijan Grand Prix coming up this weekend. Racing is back. So qualifying is on the Friday, as mentioned, that being 2 p.m. if you're watching, listening or indeed observing in the UK, that being British summertime. The sprint qualifying is on the Saturday, that being 9:30 a.m. And then in terms of the sprint itself, on Saturday it's 2:30 p.m. And then Sunday, when the race is, that's midday. So a reminder, midday for the race if you're watching, listening or observing in the UK. We'll be back to discuss all this and more in the next episode, and we look forward to having you with us for then. Until next time, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week.